Hello, everyone. I'm David Curry, CEO of Open Doors USA. I'd like to welcome you to the Open Doors release of the 2021 World Watch List, our annual ranking of religious freedom conditions for Christians around the world. This year, we're going to surface some surprising new changes in the persecution landscape. We're also going to include some interviews with expert sources. And I think most importantly, we're going to have firsthand experiences from people who have suffered persecution themselves from some really difficult and remote places. Would like to especially welcome members of the press. Nice to have you with us. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of the session. I please would ask you to refer to your media insert on how to submit your questions. I have a device here in front of me, and I'll see those and I'll take them in the order in which I get them. I also want to thank CBN and his channel for their partnership in streaming this on their networks. So grateful for them, and we welcome all of those watching on those outlets. Now to the World Watch List 2021. This past year, 2020, has been a year of uncertainty and fear. We've been all fighting a virus that we cannot see with the naked eye. Less known, but equally as viral, is the discrimination, isolation, and violence against Christians using COVID-19 as a leverage and as justification. On Christmas Eve in the Borno state of Nigeria, in the northeast of that country, Boko Haram, an ISIS-associated extremist group, executed 12 Christians. 2 more remain missing. It was an example, one of many examples, of extremists who are emboldened by government, weakened by COVID-19 restrictions, knowing that they can steal food and medical supplies from already embattled Christian communities around the world. Just in the northeast of Nigeria, Christians have been reporting only 15% of the emergency rations that others have gotten. COVID has clearly affected all of us around the world, yet for some, their faith has made them more vulnerable, less able to get food, less able to get the assistance they need to support their families. And it's made them vulnerable to attack and discrimination. This year, the 2021 World Watch List shows that governments and extremists are using COVID-19 as a way to justify an increase in the persecution of Christians. And today it's a call to all of us to stand and advocate for religious freedom. Later in this press conference, we're honored to have Ambassador Sam Brownback, who will talk about how it is an important subject, not just for Christians and for people of religious faith, but for all U.S. citizens around the world and around the country. The World Watch List helps us to see the viral spread of persecution and those most in danger, and it's also an indicator of where we need to secure and protect the right to freedom. Why? So that people don't have to live in fear because they're a religious minority or because they want to read a Bible. The World Watch List is the premier grassroots data. This comes from the people up of all of the incidents and all the causes of persecution against Christians for their religious beliefs. The shocking number this year is that 340 million Christians suffer high levels of persecution and discrimination. That's 1 in 8 Christians worldwide. Let me talk for just a moment about the individual that's affected by this persecution. In North Korea, there was a man, his name was Yong-woo. He was born there to a broken home. Inside, he was hurt and lonely and heartbroken. And one day, he was befriended by someone who was a Christian, a person of faith. And that person showed Yong-woo love and acceptance. He began to attend a Bible study. Despite all of the restrictions in North Korea and the danger to him, it was that important to him. One day he was at a Bible study and he began to close in prayer. He said, "Amen." As he said amen, he felt a cold pistol against his head. And he heard a guard say, "Freeze." That moment was the beginning of years of prison and labor camp. Today, there's over 60,000 Christians in labor camp for no more than having a Bible or being suspected even of being a Christian. Yang Wu had a difficult time. He suffered torture, starvation. He saw death on a daily basis, and it nearly broke him. He says it nearly caused him to give up his faith. Yet today, Yang Wu is more than the faceless number that he was given in that labor camp. He's living proof of the cruelty of North Korea towards Christians and religious minorities. That's one of the reasons why North Korea is #1 today for the 20th year in a row, with over 500,000 people, we believe, suffering for their faith within that country. It's also people like Pastor Gurav, who was just one of 72 Indian citizens in India who were detained without trial because they were Christians. I want to remind you, India is the world's largest democracy, yet since 2014, there's been a shocking rise in the attacks on Christians, mob violence, and it seems to be a concerted agenda. Pastor Gurav was beaten, interrogated, all about his church and his ministry and how they were funded. It's also people like Affordia. She's a precious woman. You're going to meet her a little later in this press conference, who was widowed by the Islamic extremists in Nigeria, Boko Haram. More Christians are murdered in Nigeria than any other country that we can document. On average, about 10 Christians are killed for their faith in Nigeria every single day. That's one of the reasons why Nigeria is #9 on the World Watch List. When Affordia's husband was assassinated in front of her, they then made her get on her knees, and they put a gun to her head. These are the faces, these are the people represented by the World Watch List. But there are also larger trends that stand out when we look at the numbers and the data. The first is this, that extremists are using COVID-19 to gain ground. Somalia, #3 on the World Watch List. It's reported by the BBC and other outlets that Al-Shabaab, the terrorist group within that country, has spread the word and is reporting that the coronavirus is the fault of Christians. It's this kind of misinformation in some communities that is driving some of this persecution, that it's the fault of Christians. In Burkina Faso, #32 on the list, despite the fact it just entered the World Watch List 3 years ago, the rise in persecution is so intense in the north of that country that right now there's over 1 million internally displaced people in Burkina Faso, most of them Christians, just in the northeast of the country. Boko Haram extremists are taking advantage of weak central governments, taking advantage of the COVID crisis to make it difficult or impossible for aid to get to Christian communities and to punish those Christians. Reports are that there are no churches able to open in the northeast of Burkina Faso, not only because of COVID-19, but because they are not able to safely meet in Burkina Faso. Why? Because militants are waging war against those that they consider to be infidels and exploiting these fragile governments. It's not just religious extremists, but drug cartels as well. In Latin America, to the surprise of some, you have Colombia at #30 and Mexico at #37. That's because drug cartels are looking for bishops, priests, other Christians who are speaking out against the reign of terror of drug cartels there, and those bishops and those priests are being extorted, ambushed, robbed, shot, and some even killed. Our second trend is that nationalism allows countries and communities to deny aid and intensify persecution against religious minorities. I mentioned India. Priya was also an Indian citizen who was a follower of Jesus, and she was just one of 115,000 Christians who were denied aid in her village and other villages for being a religious minority. She said this pandemic has made our life miserable. She then described how her husband is unable to find work because of his faith. and their family facing starvation, total despair. They were denied materials that would help them to survive because they were Christians. The message within India seems to be, you're not really an Indian citizen unless you're a Hindu. Likewise, in Turkey, number 25, up from number 36 last year, due to a rise in hate speech and attacks on Christians, not just within that country, but also in the border regions as well, like Syria, Armenia. Our third trend, perhaps the most chilling, is that governments like China are using COVID-19 to increase surveillance and repression of Christians and other religious minorities. This rise of the surveillance state, which I've talked about in years past, of China and their technology, I think poses, and I think the data proves, that this surveillance poses the greatest threat to human rights today. China has re-entered the top 20 for the first time in over a decade and is number 17 on the 2021 World Watch List. On December 30th, a pastor and 5 parishioners, in this case a pastor and 5 female parishioners, in a private home, were arrested in a raid by 40 SWAT team members with machine guns. Their crime? They were attending a Bible study. Pastor Anya Kui is still being detained. The books, the Bibles, were confiscated, and even their choir robes were taken. China's war on faith, a return to government as God. The Soviet philosophy is back. It's not just against Christians, though. We want to be clear. Ethnic and Muslim, religious Uyghurs are being persecuted at a shocking and tragic rate. We have an expert, a Uyghur herself, Rushan Abbas, later in this program, who's going to share a little bit of her experience, and we encourage you to look deeper into what's happening with Uyghur Muslims in the northwest of China. This persecution blueprint of surveillance and repression is being spread around the world. They're selling this technology to places like Iran and elsewhere. We have Sahar, who herself was a Christian in Iran before she was able to escape, who experienced that surveillance, technical surveillance, and she was detained because of it. We're going to share her story a little later. I want to be clear. Governments and extremists are using COVID-19 as a justification to increase persecution. And as a country, we must support the values of freedom. As free people, we must stand with those who seek freedom of conscience, the ability to decide for yourself what you believe. And we have to share their stories. That's part of what this is about, and I hope that you will share these stories. Churches, places of worship, even worship itself, it must remain sacred and free from discrimination so that everyone has the freedom to think, to study, and to practice the faith of their choosing, even if they choose not to have any faith at all. How serious is it? On Easter Sunday, armed Chinese guards raided the homes of Christians and detained them for watching church on Zoom. Earlier, I had a chance to interview Dr. Chris Meserole, a foreign policy expert at the Brookings Institute, about what he describes as digital authoritarianism. Here's what he had to say in my interview.
I think this is one of the fundamental differences between the 21st century and some of the past regimes we've seen in terms of trying to crack down on religion, is that there's a whole suite of new technologies that make it possible for governments to track and surveil religious communities that just previously weren't available to anyone. But what's never been possible before really is a surveillance technology that enabled the regime to ban like private forms of religion, right? Even kind of the private, messages and communications that people have, or what they say in their home, or banning and effectively enforcing the ability of religious communities to kind of meet in private, maybe not in a public church, but in somebody's house. And on top of that, they've also got this incredible array of geolocation data so that if you are trying to meet with certain folks in private, they can actually figure that out and begin to unwind some of those private religious communities too. And that's what's really new here, and what, in my view, is really something that we in this country and those of us who do enjoy religious freedom really should be kind of raising the alarm bell on, because we don't want it to spread around the world, because it'll have material impact on the ability of people to believe and worship what they would like to. And then, in addition to kind of blocking your ability to have religious community and also kind of express, through clothing or through behavior, certain forms of religious identity that are important to you, they can also begin to monitor what it is that you're writing and searching for online, right? There's a very extensive, the Chinese state has a very extensive capability to monitor all the WeChat messages that you might send, for example. And there are well-documented examples of religious minorities in China being arrested and even detained by virtue of the religious just images that they send, right? If you're a Buddhist in Tibet and you send a picture of the Dalai Lama, you can be detained for that, and they'll be able to monitor it. And so it goes beyond just where you're going to church or where you're going to temple to what it is that you're writing and thinking about in your phone. If there are individuals that they're particularly concerned about, one of the ways that they'll maintain surveillance over them is that they'll have facial recognition cameras or CCTV cameras installed widely throughout a mosque, and then they will take those feeds and run them through facial recognition technology in real time, and they can kind of identify who is coming into the mosque, who is leaving the mosque. And especially when you couple that kind of data with the kind of location data I was talking about earlier with cell phone location data, you can begin to build up a really kind of frightening level of detail in terms of your knowledge of where somebody's been and what they're doing. And it's a new technology that we haven't really seen before used in quite this way. And it's something that, again, if we're concerned about religious freedom, we should really be taking it seriously. But it's something that I think deserves even more attention going forward, because it's not a problem that's going to stay in China, unfortunately. There's really no other country that can kind of match, I think, the sheer scale of surveillance technologies that China has developed and also deployed. I mean, there's one thing to have the technology, it's another to kind of train your bureaucracies to use them efficiently and effectively, and they're far and away the leading developer of those technologies and implementers of those technologies today. I think what's at stake is really kind of the credibility of democratic countries, both in certainly the credibility of the U.S., but also just kind of the democratic alliance that has really, and the democratic order that's been sustained really since the end of World War II, right? We built out this kind of liberal international order that was predicated on expanding human freedom and expanding human rights, religious freedom being one of those freedoms and rights. And I think if we're not able to meaningfully counter what China's been doing and the way that it's been exporting its surveillance systems around the world, it's very hard to see how the liberal traditions and kind of the human rights and democracy agenda that we've seen really flourish over the last 25 or 30 years. It's hard to see how that continues to thrive and be sustained.
I wanted to talk with someone who had experienced this surveillance firsthand. So I had a chance to interview the Reverend Jonathan Liu, who was a pastor at the authorized Three Self Church in China. And here's what he had to say about the censorship within the country against Christians. Okay, Pastor, I've been in the government-sanctioned church. I've met with home church leaders. What would happen to a pastor of a Three Self Church that tried to disobey the communist system, that tried to challenge or preach something from the gospel that was not accepted by the Communist Party?
那他肯定不能够再干下去了，他会被解职，会被解聘。而这种情况在三自教会里是不允许发生的。不过呢，就是三自教会它不可能，三自这个组织它不可能管理所有的教堂。那么一些基层的 底层的教会呢，那情况会好一点，而在大城市的这种比较高层的地方的这个教堂呢，管理的更加严格一点。
Pastor, how is the social scoring system, the citizenship score within China, affecting Christians?
这个对基督徒的，现在在中国去教堂，他都需要身份证和手机号码的注册，这让所有参加教会崇拜的人的隐私全都暴露在政府的监管之下。那么这些基督徒，政府会给他们一些压力，尤其在一些比较小的城市当中。那么尤其是教师，还有医生，那么他们会受到压力，让他们签字脱离基督教会，放弃基督教的信仰。还有一些拿政府的低保的那些老人，他们也会被受到政府的压力，要求他们放弃信仰。如果不愿意的话，政府就取消对他们的补助。我还听到有年轻的夫妇要他们放弃基督教信仰，如果不愿意的话，他们的孩子不能够上学。但是这些呢，都是在比较偏远的地方，或者小型城市当中，在大城市里没有听说过。但是在大城市会发生这个问题，就是有很多的隐藏的一些共产党员，他们会参加教会的崇拜。那么这些人如果他们也被监控的话呢，他们就不愿意再去教会了。还有这样呢，也会阻止在18岁以下的年轻人进入到教堂当中。
It's not just persecution of Christians within China. China is also detaining over 1 million ethnic and religious Muslim Uyghurs. I believe it could be a pilot program for what could happen to Christians. We have an expert, a Uyghur Muslim, Rushan Abbas, who shares her story of what's happening to her and her family at great cost. So let's get into a few of the basics around these concentration camps. The people who are being held there, are they being held there for criminal activity?
None of them. More than 1 million. Right now we are saying more than 3 million people, actually. None of them are charged with any kind of crimes. Just saying Salam Alaikum, which is Arabic greetings, means peace be with you. Most peaceful way to say hello, basically. Even saying that could cause you to end up in the concentration camps. So basically, Chinese communist regime is waging a war against religion. So to me, this is a test for the conscience of the world. This is about the humanity. What they are doing to Uyghur people is being used as a pilot program. China's already exporting this to other parts of the world, to other countries. So if we don't stop what the Chinese government is doing to the Uyghurs right now, just to look at the Uyghur people today and imagine the future, the tomorrow for the world, and what kind of world we are living for our children and our grandchildren.
A persecution blueprint means that China is exporting this technology and that others can use it to monitor online behavior and other kinds of behavior using facial recognition and other technologies to suppress religious expression. One such country is Iran, and we talked to Sahar, who herself was monitored and detained. Here's a part of her story.
بله، من فکر میکنم که این کارو میکنن برای اینکه میدونم که تلفن خود من شنود میشد از طرف دولت و هر وقت که ما تو گروه خانگی جمع میشدیم گوشی‌های تلفنمون رو به اتاق دیگه میبردیم و خاموش میکردیم به خاطر اینکه احتمال اینکه ردیابی کنن و یا حتی صحبتایی بود که ممکن از طریق گوشی‌های تلفن افراد بتونن صداها رو توی محیط ضبط کنن. نمیدونم چقدر صحت داشت ولی احتمالش خیلی بالاست. و میدونم که یک تیم مخصوص داره وزارت اطلاعات ایران برای هک کردن ایمیل ها، هک کردن سیستم های کسایی که زیر نظر دارن و تا اونجایی که بتونن و در توانشون باشه باجت های خیلی خوبی هزینه میکنن برای اینکه بتونن هر چقدر که میتونن از تکنولوژی کمک بگیرن برای کنترل کردن بیشتر مردم.
To give us a perspective on the front lines of the State Department and why this matters to every U.S. citizen, we asked Ambassador Sam Brownback to share a little bit of his perspective on the World Watch List.
Hi, I'm Sam Brownback, Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom for the United States. And I want to commend Open Doors for their annual World Watch List report. This report annually highlights the worst persecution that Christians face around the world. And I appreciate that they put this information out and that people are starting to hear about it and they're seeing it and they're acting on it. Unfortunately, so much of the world suffers high levels of religious persecution, and Christians more than anybody else. But I also want to tell those persecuting nations, your days are numbered. The rest of the world is taking notice. An alliance has now formed of 32 nations to defend religious freedom for all faiths all the time, everywhere around the world. Grassroots movements are starting up roundtables in over 30 different countries to push back against all this persecution that's taking place. And there are economic and security consequences for nations that persecute. Those nations that persecute more of their people of faith are going to suffer economically and are starting to do so. Your days are numbered as persecutors. The day will come when people will be able to practice their faith freely, when governments will protect the right of religious majorities, minorities, and everybody to peacefully practice their faith. The day is moving forward and getting nearer, and groups like Open Doors really help with that effort by drawing attention to what's taking place now. We thank them. I appreciate this report being put out, and I hope that people will also consider and keep in their prayers all those who are currently being persecuted around the world. Thanks so much. God bless you all.
Finally, we want to leave you with a powerful example of the impact of persecution. Afordia was widowed at the hands of Boko Haram extremist group. And we're going to share her story. And then after her story, we'll take your questions and answers. And we ask you to submit those. And you can look at your media insert on how to do that.
But suddenly the thing happens around 9 o'clock that Boko Haram are coming into this town today. So I was busy with the women at the clinic. I don't know what was happening, but between that period, 9 o'clock to 10:30, there was no communication on cell phones. That was how the cell phone, the network ceased. And everybody was running. It is only when you see people running, then you ask and then you start finding where are your family members and then go and pick them and start running. So that was how I was in that condition. I was busy with the women. People are running, I don't know. Until 11 o'clock in the morning, the network was back. And that was when my husband found me on cell phone and informed me that I should leave the hospital, and they run away from my life.
Does Boko Haram try to isolate the city by cutting off cellular communications and other communications to the outside world?
Yes, that was what happened that day. They cut off the communication around our village.
Now let's talk about the moments, those moments where you came upon Boko Haram. Walk us through that experience.
the moment I met with the Boko Haram. In fact, initially I was thinking it was the Nigerian Army Forces because they were fully dressed in Nigerian Army Forces dress. I was like, bless the name of the Lord. The Nigerian Armed Forces have come to help us. Only that it was my husband that recognized them because when they put the uniform now, they will use another thing to tie their head. And then my husband said, these ones are not Boko Haram. These ones are not Nigerian army. They are Boko Harams. And how did you know? Then that was when my heart was afraid. And they started asking my husband, are you an infidel or a Muslim? So they took Christians to be an infidel. But my husband now said, no, I'm not an infidel. I'm a Christian. I'm neither an infidel nor a Muslim, but I'm a Christian. That was how he answered them.
And so then what happened next?
Yes. The next thing, they asked him to turn to the left side of the road. And immediately when he went to the left side, I was standing at that spot. But he went and then knelt down and started praying. Right from the time he came out of the car, he was praying. But I don't know exactly what words was he talking to God about. And then he went and knelt down, finished his prayer, and then he lied down. Then they started shooting him.
And they were all Christians that were shot?
Yes.
When Boko Haram comes into the city, they're looking for Christians? Is that right?
Yes. They were only looking for Christians. They gave the Muslims assurance that we are not looking for you. We are after these Christians.
A powerful story and the impact of persecution. Thank you very much to the members of the press who have attended this, and I appreciate your questions. If you do have questions, please submit them. I have a device here in front of me where they will pop up, and I'll take them as I can. The question comes in, how do you determine persecution and decide who is on the list? We divide this information by measuring what are the levels of violence within these particular countries, all related to religious minorities, attacks on Christians. What is life like in the private sphere of life, in your home? Is there pressure from the family if you choose a different faith? In the national life, is the government using its police forces and other methods to persecute Christians and religious minorities? So we measure across any number of these spheres to find out and to get a full picture, a well-rounded picture of what's happening within each country. Each one is unique. There are some countries where there's enormous pressure, but it's an underground pressure where you won't see a lot of violence, but there's no freedom. Saudi Arabia, for an example. There aren't any bombings of churches, and so you don't have a large degree of violence like you would in Nigeria, but then again, you're not free to choose your faith, and there is no really open expression of faith in Saudi Arabia. So that gives you a little bit of an idea on how these things are measured out and how it's scored. Each country is given a score in each of these regions. All of the data for you researchers is available online, so you can see how it's done, and you can dig into what's happening within these countries. You can begin to see, when you look at that data, why this is the most trusted grassroots data. We're not just talking to religious leaders. We're hearing firsthand from the people who are experiencing this, and we're only reporting those incidents which we can document, which means that there will certainly be more people. These are baseline numbers. There will be more people killed than what we will report. We're only reporting what we know and we can validate. That's what makes it so trustworthy. Another question. North Korea has ranked first on the list for 20 years. The situation is not likely to change unless the regime changes. But have you seen any positive change inside North Korea during the past 2 decades? And what can the world do to make this better? It's certainly my opinion that having a constructive conversation about religious liberty with the leaders of North Korea should be part of any discussion with that regime. Not just nuclear issues, but how about proving that you have some level of understanding of what human rights are? I know that other governments, the U.S. government has met with North Korean leaders. They're talking about weapons, these sorts of things, which take many years to prove whether or not there's been any compliance. But we could find out within 90 days if they're willing to be serious about this. If we talk about religious liberty, give us insight into the labor camps. Let the Red Cross, let the Ambassador for Religious Liberty go in and see what's happening there. Give us some transparency. You can find out within 60 to 30 days whether North Korea is serious about being part of the international community, and I certainly would hope that they would. Another question. The report mentions that relief discrimination is one way that COVID-19 has been used to discriminate against Christians and other religious minorities. Would you explain what that looks like in practice? Well, thank you very much for that question. I appreciate it. In India, where we have a significant number of people who've been withheld aid, you have a situation where many of the lower caste people who would be Christians have lost their jobs. They go back to their village, and there is either a misunderstanding or a political agenda around it. But in many cases, those village leaders will not distribute food to Christians because they think they have either, in a religious sense, brought a curse upon themselves, or because they say, you're not part of our group, you're not part of our tribe. So there are any number of reasons why it's happening, but we certainly know that it is happening, and it needs to stop. The difficult thing within India is that you have a democratically elected government. Prime Minister Modi was elected in 2014. He's part of a BJP, is the term, this political party, which has an agenda, a nationalist agenda, which has been targeting. They've made this open. It's been on the news. It's been discussed widely that they want to force people into the Hindu faith. And that's causing a lot of this persecution. It's giving vigilantes an opportunity and free rein to attack churches and to attack pastors, and local police and so forth to detain pastors. So there's much that can be done on a national level. India believes and is rightly part of the international community. This is an area of weakness for them. They need to allow people to choose their faith, to practice that faith peacefully. Certainly that's happening. There are over 65 million Christians in India, and they're great citizens. They love their country, and they need to have the freedom to practice their faith and go to church, take their kids to church, do what they like, and they're going to be great Indian citizens. So thank you for that question. Some of your information, next question, it said that every country in the top 50 is ranked as having very high or extreme levels of persecution. Do you see this trend continuing, and what are some of the reasons? Yes, we do see this trend continuing because the embedded forces that are driving these scores up, religious extremists, Hindu extremism in Nepal, Hindu extremism in India, the Islamic extremist groups, which we most recognize as ISIS or Al-Qaeda, that's an ideology that does not need a territory. So when ISIS is conquered, that cancer has metastasized around the world. It's in northern Nigeria, it's in Burkina Faso and Chad and Niger, it's in Somalia. So that trend is growing in strength. It's in parts of Indonesia where you see these attacks, and even in Sri Lanka. You also have governments now who have the ability, like China and its other countries that it's sold this technology to use surveillance to watch private behavior. China is using facial recognition to get into a mosque, facial recognition to get into some churches, They're scoring you. They're saying if you go to church too often, you're not a good Chinese citizen. You could lose your job. You could be restricted on travel, all because you're a person of faith. And that's new. So these trends are still in place, and that's what's driving these scores up. I don't see a relief on that until and unless we see some changes in this ideology of hate and this intolerance towards people having different ideas than what you've got. That's one of the reasons why we want to highlight what's happening with Uyghur Muslims, because it's not just about freedom of religion for Christians, it's about freedom of religion for everybody to choose their own faith, and as I like to say, to choose not to have a faith at all. This is about freedom of conscience, the ability to decide for yourself what you believe. And we need to hold up that value, perhaps now more than ever before. The next question. The BBC has reported that Christian persecution is at genocide levels. Do you believe that what is happening to Christians abroad could be classified as genocide? Certainly, in Nigeria, you've seen a genocide. The description of genocide is a purposeful and targeting of a religious group to either drive them out or to kill them. And that has happened in a massive and dramatic way in Nigeria. I see Nigeria is very reminiscent of what's happened in the north of Nigeria, in the north of Iraq when ISIS came in. We saw a rise of attacks on Christmas Eve, in the months before ISIS took over and created their caliphate. In much the same way, Boko Haram and the Fulani, these two Islamic terrorist groups, have been attacking, gaining ground. They're crossing borders. They hope to create a caliphate in that country, and they're driving Christians to the south and out of their countries and or killing them. 10 people every day are killed on average in Nigeria for their faith because they're Christians. And that's a shocking number. So those are the kinds of statistics that drive the BBC and others to say that it is a genocide, and I certainly believe that it is. The next question. Multiple articles, including The Atlantic and Quartz, report that America has a lot in common with China's surveillance state, even though the USA pretends that it does not have one. Do you believe that America is actively heading towards a surveillance state, and are you concerned that America could follow a similar path? I am certainly concerned that privacy issues online, when I talk about a church in China where people were arrested for watching that service on Zoom, I think that is a hint to what could happen anywhere where the government has a centralized system to monitor religious behavior and score it. What China is doing is unique. If you could imagine, if you want to think of it in terms of America or any other Western country, imagine if the IRS had possession or ownership of every camera in America and the ability to watch inside the restaurant, outside the restaurant, the traffic cameras, the street cameras were all owned by the IRS or whatever government agency you think may be the most aggressive or onerous, not to impugn the IRS. But that is a picture, an image for you on how intense and invasive the Chinese surveillance is. Every camera is accessible by the Chinese government. So there's nobody else that can do that at this level, certainly not America. But it's also not just about whether or not we have cameras. Cameras can sometimes keep you safe. It's about what is the purpose and the will to use it, and to use these databases to monitor private Christian behavior, the ability to watch what you search, if you're listening to sermons, to suppress and censor information. I think that certainly is available to everybody and private companies as well. So people should be mindful of their privacy. I also think, though, that if it helps you to imagine what it might be like within America, let that motivate you to care deeply about what's happening to people of faith, Christians around the world, wherever they may be. Whatever pressure or intolerance you sense or you feel, I can promise you it's 1,000 times worse in every country on the World Watch List. We'll take one more question and then we will go. The Washington Post recently reported that China was using artificial intelligence to persecute Uyghur Muslims. What role do you see artificial intelligence playing in religious persecution in the years ahead? It's a terrific question. I think this will be the blueprint that people have the ability to monitor your movements, what you're doing, what you're searching for, your sermons, whether you're going to church, how often you're going to church, and use that in some sort of negative way or to impugn you as a bad citizen. That's certainly what China is doing. The inhumanity against Uyghur Muslims is shocking. I'm thankful for all the media outlets that talk about this, because we need to know, we need to let our voices be heard. I encourage every Christian, every person of any faith, and anybody who wants to have freedom of conscience to speak out for the Uyghur Muslims. They're being detained. They say, China has said it's because of their re-education and language. Some of these people are doctors. They're well-educated people. They're not criminals. They're professors. They're trying to extinguish this culture, and they're using any number of excuses as a reason why to bring these people in to detain them, and in some cases sterilize them. They're even promoting, I saw this week that China was bragging that they're having fewer Uyghur births, and they're saying it's because of a re-education. No, they've sterilized some of these people in in detention camps. So it's very, very serious, and I think the world needs to pay attention to it. I thank you so much for all of your questions in the press, and for all of those watching. Please do share this on your social media. We need to stand up. We need to speak out for human rights for Christians and for everyone to have the ability to choose their faith. Thank you so much. Have a great day.